I think this is the best thing going on anywhere, to be in human form incarnated on Earth at this time.
At the soul level, we decide in advance what characteristics, what personality traits, what challenges we want to take on.
The soul chooses who it's going to be born to, what family it will belong to.
And I've thought many times that I might be mandated to Earth. What did I do wrong? Why am I here again?
I felt the power of my soul, the part of me that has always lived and will never die.
I started to see this bright, bright light, this beautiful bright light directly above me. I was just being lifted up by love.
If you could imagine absolute love and absolute peace, that's all you felt in this energy.
That was one of the messages I was sent back with. Go back and tell them, life is eternal.
That realm is sharp, clear, detailed, meaningful, powerful, filled with emotional truth and depth.
When Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, and she scooped Nolan up out of his physical body. And they had this exquisite reunion that you can only imagine between a mother and son.
And suddenly I could breathe fine. I was incredibly conscious. I was more alive than I've ever been.
For every 100 souls that qualifies to come down to Earth, and you've got to be an advanced soul to come down here, there's only one body.
I said, I'm home. I'm finally home. I said that over and over.
Time starts to slow down, almost collapse on itself. I began to surrender to the concept of dying.
Everything that was temporal or physical or mortal about that soul was drawn aside, and I saw who he was, and I was in the presence of the divine.
Every single person is this light walking around the center of their body, in the center of their energetic structure, in the center of their chakra system is the heart. It's the heart center. I also understood that was heaven, but this is heaven. If you want to be in heaven, you can just be there.
60 interviews, 38 questions, all in a groundbreaking documentary about the afterlife. Every soul knows the joy of remembering who we really are.
Welcome to Connecting with, Coincidences. We're doing it again right here, right now. And I'm going to do some interweaving of some ideas, which is what should be happening, hopefully, for some of you in your own lives, where the meaningful coincidences form spotlights on what you're doing. So you're in a flow, and the coincidences help you see the flow, and the flow helps you see what you're doing, and the coincidences mirror those back to you. And we have a filmmaker here today who will tell us his story about this interweaving of coincidences and making a movie. He's a lot more. Peter Alessandria is an internationally published photographer, filmmaker, author. He's done a TEDx speaker, a speaker thing or two, and a former entertainment attorney. All right. 75 awards for his work. That's a lot. He's the producer director of Every Soul Knows, The Joy of Remembering Who We Really Are, and featuring interviews with more than 60 near-death experiencers, psychics, channelers, mediums, and I will be seeing what else was in there. The film brings to light our true nature as eternal spiritual beings. Welcome, Peter, to Connecting with Coincidence. Glad to have you.
Hi, Bernard. Thanks for the invitation. Good to be here.
So you heard my intro, and you have some idea about what I'm talking about. So why don't you give us some idea of what we were just saying about the interweaving of meaningful coincidences, synchronicities, and you're making this movie, this project of yours, Every Soul Knows.
So yeah, thanks for the question. Thanks again for the invite. I just want to give a quick shout out to our mutual acquaintance, Lelania Fulton, who put us in touch with each other. And maybe that's a coincidence that we were able to come to cross each other's paths in this way. I also see that you've interviewed Dr. Eben Alexander. Eben's in the film as a near-death experiencer as well. And I'm going to start, Bernard, with a question to you.
Oh, goody.
What is it about coincidences that are so important and meaningful for you?
Well, it started when I was like 9. When my dog got lost, I got lost. We found each other. And then I kept seeing them. And I'm a curious kind of guy, and I like patterns. So I kept seeing patterns on the football field, the baseball field, in relationships, in work I was doing, in how I got promoted to full professor and chairman. They've had a major impact on me. Probably the biggest place of impact was being a part-time hippie on Haight Street in the late 60s, where synchronicity was spoken here.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So, so a synchronicity, we talk about synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence, right?
Right.
As opposed to a coincidence without significance or without meaning. But I would suggest this. Number one, I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. I don't know if you're familiar with the Course or not.
Oh, yeah. I've interviewed one of the guys. He was one of the beginners of getting that out there. Who was written about coincidences himself.
Right, right, right. So what does the Course say? The Course says that we give everything all the meaning that it has for us. In and of itself, life is meaningless. There is no inherent meaning in anything. So I'm going to start by saying, we get to decide, we get to choose what's meaningful, what's coincidental, what's a synchronicity in our lives. And I'm going to go so far as to suggest that I think, well, you've heard the saying, I'm sure many times, there are no accidents in life. And that suggests to me that everything that I experience in my life, and only speak for myself, is intentional, is meaningful in the sense that it's moving me along a path. Now, the work that I've done on my film, I'll talk about that in a minute, but the work that I've done on the film suggests that we have a path before we come into this incarnation, before we come into this lifetime. And everything that happens in our incarnation, in our lifetime, is moving us along a path that we've designed, a path that we've chosen, and a path that has special meaning for us in this particular lifetime. Now, I can look back and say, well, this happened, that led to that, which led to this, which led to that, and I can talk about those specifics if you like. But what I say when I pull back and I look at the big picture, what if all of that at some level was intended, was planned, and was executed? And the only problem is that I'm not aware enough, I'm not awake enough, I'm not present enough to recognize that there is no coincidence. That's just part of my life unfolding the way that I've intended it to unfold. What do you think about something like that?
Well, that's one of the fun parts of writing books about coincidences and talking with people about them, because I have to know how they think about reality, because the way they think about reality determines a lot about how they think about coincidences. And you did what to me is a set of contradictions, that there's no meaning out there, which is a favorite of many scientists. It's all random is what they like to be able to say. Then you went on to say, no, I think I planned this from a previous life. To me, those are contradictory, but I think you could try to make them not by saying, well, it's all random, but I made it up. And those kinds of questions are less important to me than how you use them here in this life for what your purpose is. That's my take on what you're saying.
Well, I agree with you. And the last part of your statement, I totally agree with. It's really what we do with it that matters. That's what's important. I never said it was random. And I never said that the meaning that we apply is, it's part of the intention. It's part of what we bring to living a full life, right? We get to decide what everything means for us. I don't think that's a contradiction, but we can move on from there and say that the most important thing is what we do with what happens to us in life.
That's the most important. And then what I found interesting, after we have experienced them, then we can begin to talk about how they inform us about the nature of reality, because that's my answer to your first question about my interest, because they're clues to how reality works for me.
Good. That's fair enough. I agree. So, okay, so let me get into some specifics then. So I'm going to go way back to 2008. In 2008, I was living in Los Angeles. I grew up in the New York City area. I moved to LA. I wanted to get involved in the film business. I went to law school. I went to business school. And after 4 years in Buffalo, New York, I bought a one-way plane ticket for LA and said, I'm getting out of the cold weather. And I got involved in the film business. I eventually fell in love with filmmaking as a creative venture, as opposed to just from the business and legal side. And then in 2008, a little thing rolled around called the global financial crisis. And at that point, I had been working as an entertainment attorney, intellectual property attorney for almost 20 years. And Bernard, I went from a beautiful six-figure lifestyle to nothing in a matter of weeks. Literally in a matter of weeks, I lost my business. And so I came to a crossroads in my life. Now, I spent a few months trying to resurrect my law practice, trying to do whatever I could to continue on that path, but nothing was working out. And eventually I said, well, maybe this is an opportunity as opposed to a challenge or a crisis. And maybe there's some gift in this experience for me. And so what I said was, if I could do anything with the rest of my life, what would it be? And the answer was filmmaking, photography, being a creative person. Because as a lawyer, I watched everybody else creating, and there was some creativity to being a good lawyer, obviously, but it wasn't the same. And so I took that opportunity and said, okay, I'm going to run with this. So I decided to change my whole life. I moved back to the East Coast to be closer to my family. I left the law behind. I literally let my law license lapse. And now I'm going to take on the world as a creative professional. And I had been spending, my nights and weekends, I was informally teaching myself the creative arts, photography, filmmaking, and all of that. And so now I moved back to the East Coast, and I'm telling my friends and family in the world that I am now, I've left the law behind and I'm a creative professional. And for almost 3 years, about 2.5 years, nothing happened. I set up some websites to promote my work, incorporated my business, set up the bank accounts. I mean, I did those kinds of things. But then I was kind of just expecting the universe to deliver all these clients and create this whole new life for me. And I found out pretty quickly that it's not how it works.
It's not necessarily how it works. It does happen sometimes. Just to comment on I think one of the most important things you've said today is that you turn the crisis into opportunity. That is a fundamental element, somehow related to meaningful coincidences, where you take the stumbling block and turn it into a stepping stone, where you do something with it. And I compliment you for saying that so clearly, and then holding that in mind while you went 3 years with nothing happening. So nothing's happened. The universe didn't just say, hey, Peter, there's some stuff over here. Just look at this and it'll go for you. So what happened then after 3 years?
Well, let me say, I did have a choice in that moment as to the meaning I was going to give that situation, right?
Yes.
So at first it was a crisis. At first I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have my whole life wrapped up in this business and now it's gone. right? So it took some work, and it took some spiritual, some soul searching, some spiritual work to really say, okay, wait, I get to choose what this means in my life. I get to decide. And so I felt like at the time, I felt like I chose my passion. I chose my higher calling, right? And then I was very confused when the universe didn't just deliver it up on a platter.
Now
Right?
that's that. I keep laughing at that because you open-hearted look. I'm doing it the right way here. I've turned this crisis into opportunity. I'll set everything up for my creativity. What happened now that you look back that the universe didn't say, "There's a wolf over there, Peter. Why don't you go make an opera out of it?"
Yeah, well, so this is what happened. So after almost about 2.5, 3 years, the money started to run out. So I had a
Yeah.
bunch of money saved, right? And now the money's gone, and I'm like, oh crap, now what am I going to do, right? And I realized, Bernard, what I realized was, and I had all these reasons why it wasn't working out, right? First, it was because of the economy, right? Because the economy was still, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you remember 2008, 2009.
Oh,
And
yeah.
even the next couple of years after that, it was a mess. But then I saw some other people in the field who were actually doing pretty well, and I thought, well, okay, maybe it's not the economy. And then I thought at one point, I thought, well, I'm completely self-taught as a creative person. I never took I don't have any formal education. I never even took an art appreciation class in college. I was law, business, economics, and here I am as a creative professional. But then I met some other photographers who were self-taught, and they were doing pretty well. At one point, I was even convinced it was because I didn't have the latest and greatest camera equipment, right? What I eventually realized, Bernard, was the problem wasn't out there, the problem wasn't here, right?
Right.
And what happened was I had a very negative self-image when it came to being a creative person. I was terrified to put myself out there. At least as a lawyer, I had the degree, I had the diploma, I took the bar exam, all of that. But as a creative person, I had nothing other than what I brought to the table in terms of talent, skill, and all of that. But I was filled with self-doubt. I was filled with fear of criticism and rejection. And that's what was causing me to basically hide out from life,
Yeah.
go through all my savings, and then wake up one morning and say, shit, I really got to do this.
Yeah. And I, before you say, shit, I got to do this, you say you had no education. You had a great education as an entertainment lawyer. You saw what the other creative people were doing. You saw what creative was and what it wasn't, a lot of that. So you had an education, which I will add as very important to what you've done since then.
Well, I'll echo that. I say this all the time, actually. Everything that I've done in my life has prepared me for this moment. Right. And including, 20 years as an entertainment attorney, once I turned that corner and started creating a life as a creative person, when those contracts started coming in, those licensing agreements and everything else that they started, all the different people started sending me, I would mark them up. I would redline them. I'd send them back, and they'd look at me and say, who the hell are you? And I said, well, you didn't read my bio, did you? So that has served me. Yes, you're absolutely right. So all that experience, all that, and a lot of artists, they lament the fact that they don't have business background or legal background. I bring all of that to the table, and I don't take it for granted for a minute. I'm very grateful for all of that. But there's still another element, which is, for me at least, the creative work. It's kind of like when I put my creative work out there, it was almost like I was putting myself out there and feeling, again, and there's no rational explanation for this, although I feel like I've gotten to the bottom of it, which we can talk about if you want. But this feeling that I don't have what it takes, I'm not good enough, the imposter syndrome that everybody talks about now, right?
Yeah.
And all of that conspired to create fear. Fear equals resistance, and resistance is I don't get off the couch. So now the money's run out. I got to do everything that somebody who's starting a new business has to do, which includes sales, marketing, and all of that. So I started doing things like cold calling, right? I cold called. So my photography business in particular was commercial photography and fine art photography. The commercial work was going to be like e-commerce stuff for websites, for Amazon, photographing product photography and all of that. I was also going to be doing executive portraits and headshots. So all the local real estate people, the medical offices, accountants and lawyers doing headshots for their websites and all of that. And my tagline, especially for the lawyers, when I would call and pitch my photography services, was, I used to be a lawyer, and now I shoot them. The executive assistants love that. The lawyers, they didn't always laugh. But it was doing all of that. And what I realized, Bernard, was, in 2 years of cold calling, I never got hung up on once. And in fact, some of the people, they must have felt sorry for me because I started recommending friends that I could call because they weren't interested. And I realized, wow, it was never their criticism that was a problem. It was my criticism of myself. Because before, during, and after every phone call, I would be beating myself up. Who do you think you are? Nobody's going to want to hire you. You don't know what you're doing. You didn't go to school. I mean, all this negative self-talk that created all this fear and anxiety. But I realized it wasn't coming from outside of me. So this was the beginning of the transformation, was to say, oh, wait a second, I'm in charge here. I get to decide. Now, what happened was I had also been studying for years, in addition to everything else I've been doing. I was kind of a spiritual seeker. I was interested in metaphysics and all of that. And I would study things like law of attraction, visualization, affirmations. I mean, all the stuff that I could do to kind of reprogram all that negative thinking. And I started to apply that as well. I did something that was very helpful, which I recommend to anybody who's starting a new business, which is I got an action partner. And that's somebody that I connected with on a usually daily basis to lay out my plans for the day, to support them in starting their business, to have that somebody on that I could call and talk things through. And then I just had to do it. I mean, what I realize now is all the affirmations, all the visualizations, all of that stuff only does one thing. And this is what Tony Robbins would call changing my state, changing my mental and my emotional state. Why? So I could take the actions that I needed to take to put myself out there in the world as a creative professional. So I started doing things like submitting my work for publication. Living close to New York City and having grown up in this area, my fine art photography business includes a lot of photographs of New York City, especially at night, especially with the full moon. We place the full moon over the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, and creating these really stunning visual images. And so what I did one day is I decided I wanted to get my work published in the newspaper. So I called all the local papers, including the biggest paper in New York City at the time, and I just cold called them, and I asked to speak to the photo department, and they put me through, and I got one of the photo editors on the phone. I introduced myself. Now, I feel like I'm going to throw up. I'm so anxious about this, right? But I kind of stumbled through that conversation. I said, I'm a local photographer. I have some great images of New York City. I'd love to send them to you. Maybe you guys want to publish them. She said, great. She gave me her email address. She said, yeah, send them whenever you have them. Bernard, for the next 9 months, at least 3 or 4 times a month, I sent her photographs, and I never heard a word. Nothing. I didn't even know if I had the right email address, right? So I came to a crisis point, and I just said, wow, maybe I'm really not good enough. Maybe I don't have what it takes. And then I thought, no, wait a second. That's how the old Peter would think about this. I want to have a different life, which means I have to think differently about myself and about my life. And so I said, you know what? I'm not going to give up on myself this time. I'm going to keep sending her photos until she tells me to stop, or she tells me they want to publish them. About a week and a half later, I get a phone call. I thought it was like a spam call. I didn't even recognize the number. I answer it. It's her. She's like, oh, we love that photo you sent in last week of the Statue of Liberty and the moon. We want to run it in the paper on Sunday. I was like, great. She's like, how much do you charge? I was like, oh, fuck. I don't know. How much do you pay? We ended up negotiating a rate. That newspaper, which was the largest, probably is still the largest paper in New York City, eventually they went on to publish 11 of my photos, prime spots in the newspaper. And then she started calling me. Did you get any photos of the fireworks over in New York City last night? Did you get any fireworks, any photos of this or that? So it was this total transformation. And the only thing that changed was how I saw myself. I chose consciously to see myself as valuable, as worthy, as good enough, not better than anybody else, but good enough, right? And that began this complete change in my life.
How do you
As you
think
mentioned,
how do you think that works, Peter? Where you are able to um, think something that we could say is radically different from the way you had been thinking, uh, turn it all around, and then a week and a half later you get the phone call. And the correlation isn't causation. We hear that many times. But nevertheless, the way you describe it, it appears that somehow there's a connection between your shift in how you were thinking and then what happened with the Herald Tribune, I'm going to say, the newspaper that you got published in.
well, I would say this. You mentioned this earlier. I believe we create our own reality, and I believe we do that through our attention. At a metaphysical level, attention equals intention. I believe we're a lot more powerful and capable than we know, and I believe that for me at least, I was my own biggest enemy in all of this. I was the one who was holding myself back by having these negative thoughts that came from childhood. Basically, I was living a life that I wasn't aware I was living. It was kind of a subconscious program that was running that was based on the conclusions of a 5-year-old that I had never questioned because I was never aware of them. And the conclusions were, you're not good enough, they're not going to like you, you don't have what it takes, all that negative stuff. And I wasn't even aware that this was running my life. And I had done, at that point, I'd done 20 years of therapy and self-help and read all the books and all of that. But it wasn't until I reached that moment when I had to choose. I remember this so vividly. There was a choice point. I could either go down the old route, say, okay, there you go. That's proof you're not good enough. You're a fraud, imposter, whatever it is. Or I could say, nope, that's the old me. I'm breaking free of that. I'm going in this direction. And I can't tell you.
I understand that. But somehow what you're saying going in this direction actually impacted your reality.
Well, yeah, of course. What,
well, yeah, of course.
Why are you surprised at that?
Yeah, of course.
How else would it work?
Well, it could be coincidental. And my favorite way of thinking about it is it's telepathic, that you could pick up that they were about to call you because you were so tuned into them and how they were responding. So it was a form of precognition. That's another way of thinking about it, that you already knew you were going to be contacted. And so that gave you the confidence to be able to think about it.
I understand. That doesn't ring true for me.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I do believe
it doesn't ring true. But I was just giving you an alternative way of thinking about it. That your idea was the change of your mind changed your reality.
Yeah, I think it did.
Okay.
I think that's true for all of us. I think there's a lot more going on here, Bernard, than most of us are aware of. And that's one of the gifts of this film that I've been working on. So let me talk a little bit about that.
Oh, please do.
So basically, so I went through this. Let me just very quickly say, I went from somebody who never won an award for anything in my life to somebody who's won more than 75 awards for my photography. I went from somebody who was afraid to post photos on social media, like Facebook and all of that, to somebody, my work has been published in newspapers and magazines, online. Literally millions of people have seen my work, right? And I eventually went from not being able to get off the couch to traveling the world as a professional photographer. I mean, literally traveling the world. The only thing that changed, Bernard, was how I saw myself, who I thought I was. And I actually ended up writing a book about my experience called Be Bigger Than You Think You Are, Overcoming Our Self-Imposed Limits to Have the Life We Want. And basically the premise of this book is that the most important question we can ask ourselves is, who do you think you are? Who am I?
That's a song. Who do you
Right?
think you are? Yeah, go ahead.
Because whoever we think we are is exactly who we're going to end up being in life. Okay? And the other thing, so changing my self-concept, my self-image, questioning all the old beliefs that were limiting, that were holding me back, understanding that the problem wasn't out there, the problem wasn't here, and understanding how to change that and to shift that. The other big change that comes out in the book and in my life in general is I went from being my own worst enemy to my own best friend, which means I had to learn how to love myself enough to take the risks that I needed to take to put myself out there. Because if I did get rejected, again, it wasn't them who was making me feel the way I was feeling, it was me. And I was able to change the meaning of the rejections, because there were plenty of them. For every one of those awards, there were at least 5 failures, rejections, and disappointments, right? I had to give that a new meaning and then use that new meaning to continue to propel myself, to continue to move forward.
Excellent. And I'm going to turn it around a little bit. My problem has been that I've been thinking I'm too wonderful than I actually am. That I think I should be accomplishing more than I have. That if I don't get X or Y, then there's something wrong here. I'm not doing it right. It still gets down to not doing it right, but I've had to bring down my expectations of myself rather than bring them up the way you just did.
Well, I totally understand that. I would say, there's a difference between not doing it right and not being good enough. Not doing it right is, okay, I need to make an adjustment here. I need what, the kids today, they call it pivoting. I need to pivot. I need to make a change, right? And I have to be open to feedback to understand that, okay, this is no longer working. I need to do something different, as opposed to I'm never going to succeed because I'm a piece of crap.
Maybe I didn't say it very well, but I've accomplished a lot. Went to some of America's finest schools, was chairman of a psychiatry department, outstanding football, baseball, pretty good rugby player, also some national awards in psychiatry, a lot of stuff, 3 books on synchronicity, and more. So, but somehow it hasn't been to match some of the guys I know, like Andrew Weil, who was an intern with me, and he's gotten out there with his integrative medicine, and another guy who's been the grandfather of collaborative care, which has gone all over the world now. And I know these guys, and I say I'm as good as those guys, but I haven't had the impact that they've had.
So what do you attribute that to?
Well, I'm not doing something right. But what I've done lately is be able to do something like what you're doing, but it's the inverse of it, is reduce my expectations of what I can do. There's an old Yiddish story of a guy saying, I want to be like Rabbi Ishmael. He's a wonderful man. I want to be like him. And his friend says, he wouldn't want you to be like him. He would want you to be you.
Well, that's beautiful advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Other people can inspire us for sure. Right. But we have to be ourselves. I mean, that authenticity is really, really important.
So important.
I would say this: Course in Miracles says you do not ask too much of life, but far too little. All right. Now, I love the fact that you feel like you have high expectations and all of that. And I actually get that. And yet, Andrew Weil, I mean, those guys are really making an impact. And if you feel called to that kind of level of impact, then I think there'll be a way for you to achieve that if you believe in yourself.
I do. And that's the trouble. And the book I'm writing now is called Therapy for Humanity, where I'm putting humanity in the chair in a therapist's office. And the book is about what happens in that therapy office and a lot of other stuff around it. And that's an intention to try to help humanity. And that's not a small intention, but I'm getting to the end of it, and I don't know. Now it's gotten to self-acceptance, Peter, where I'm doing it. Doing the kind of the denouement of it. It's coming to the end of the symphony, and I'm writing to the end of it. And so now it's just Bernie doing it, and I got to just see what happens, and hope it gets published, and then see how things develop.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So
You're welcome.
my story is similar actually with the film. I've been working on this film for almost 3 years, right? So it's a documentary. It's, again, the title is Every Soul Knows, The Joy of Remembering Who We Really Are. The website is everysoulknows.com. And so three things happened in 2019. The first thing that happened was I was in California. I was doing a photo shoot for a client. I was going to, I was in LA. After the photo shoot, I was heading up to Yosemite to do some fine art photography some landscape photography of the park. And I injured myself before I even got to the park. I tore my calf muscle. I was getting out of the car to find a bathroom in Mariposa, just outside of Yosemite, tore my calf muscle, and I was instantly rendered lame. I was completely out of commission. I was booked in there for a week. But what came in that moment, Bernard, was, and I don't know if you ever torn a calf muscle, it's the most painful thing you can imagine, right? And at 1 minute, everything's fine. I have this whole plan for the next week, and I'm going to do all this wonderful stuff. The next minute, I can't even walk. But I heard very clearly. Now, I had been thinking about writing this book for almost 4 or 5 years at that point, maybe longer, maybe 6 years, right? And I kept saying, yeah, one day, I'm going to write a book. In the moment that I injured my leg, and make of this what you will, I call it a moment of clarity. I think now I was actually receiving guidance from what I'll call my spirit guides. And what I heard was, now you can write your book.
Uh-huh. Now let's pause on this one because we're getting parallel lives here with me. I hurt my back about 6 weeks ago, and I couldn't walk around very well. And I wanted to take a trip to where the publishing house is that I'd like to publish my book. They publish other ones, and I couldn't do it. But I've recovered enough that it was with some pain I will be going there, and hopefully they'll be interested in what I'm writing. But the period of time of recovery has allowed me to hear what I call the holy guardian angel sometimes. I call them names too, but they call me names. And I said, okay, you don't call me asshole anymore, and I won't call you fuckers. And let's just be nicer to each other because we've been having this interchange. You fuckers did this to me. That's what I would do. And now it's like I'm listening to them and hearing what they have to say. So if there's anything our audience can get from this, and there are many things, it's the idea that there are voices that are somewhat external to us that are offering us guidance if we allow ourselves to listen.
Well, yeah, that's very well said. And we cover that in the film. So the film actually has 35 questions and that I had, basically the questions that I had about the afterlife. And one of the questions is, do we have spirit guides or angels that assist us during a given lifetime? Now, what I would say is, I don't know that it's somewhat external. I think for me, it's more internal. It's actually going within to find that guidance. I do believe that there are beings, angels, spirit guides, ancestors, and there are beings that guide us through our life. They may or may not speak to us. What's more common, I think, having met with all these people who had near-death experiences, what seems to be more common is we receive signs and symbols, and that's a form of communication. But the bigger point is there is help, there is assistance, there is guidance available. And for me now, I have to get quiet. I have to ask for the help. Then I have to be willing to listen to the help. I have to be willing to put aside my scenario you know, the way I want it to go, and to be open to the idea that it may go another way, which actually may be better than what I could have ever imagined. You know, there's for me, you know, it really is, you know, surrendering my will to a greater will, to a higher force, right? Something I didn't mention, but I spent over 20 years in 12-step programs. And that was completely life-changing. I've been sober for almost 30 years now, continuous sobriety. And the 12-step work that I did introduced me to the idea of a higher power, introduced me to the idea of a greater will, not in the sense of subordinating or being a subject to, or be, you know, in some way groveling for this deity to fix my life, but to understand that that's where my power comes from. My true power comes from something greater than myself. And so, you know, my life is completely different as a result of all of that. And so the way this film happened was, so I said 3 things happened in 2019. So the first was that I injured myself, and I heard, now you can write your book. And that night, I'm still in Yosemite. Somehow I made it to the hotel. You want a synchronicity? The clerk, I hopped in on one foot at the hotel. The clerk's looking at me, what happened? I explained to him what happened, and I knew, I didn't go to the hospital because I knew what the injury was. I'd had the same injury on my other leg about 5 years earlier, maybe another coincidence there. So I knew what the treatment was. He just happened to have a pair of crutches that I could use for that week. He helped me to the room, and that night, Bernard, I sat down and I started writing this book, and I didn't stop until it was done almost 9 months later. I eventually made it back to the East Coast, obviously. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened in 2019 was my dad passed. And he had been ill for a long time, but that was the first major loss for me. And it was very sad, you know, and it kind of reignited this desire to know the answers to some of life's biggest questions, like what happens when we die, right? And who are we really? What's really going on here? Now, again, I had kind of been a spiritual seeker for many years. I had read all kinds of things. I'd done, you know, workshops, seminars, metaphysics, visualization, you know, all of that stuff. And I was familiar with the idea of the afterlife, but I hadn't really dived into it. And then a couple of months later, maybe another coincidence, somehow a book found its way to me. It was actually a novel called Adventures in the Afterlife. And when I read this book, I was like, I mean, it really touched a chord with me, right? And so I was like, it really got me thinking about what happens after we die and what's really going on here. And what I ended up doing, Bernard, was I ended up reaching out to the author and optioning the book to turn it into a feature film. So I started writing the screenplay based on the novel. And here's the thing, he confirmed, so this guy, he has like out-of-body experiences. He hasn't had a near-death experience, but he does astral projection and all of that. And he said, and I said to him, I said, you know, this is all amazing, but it's fiction, right? And he said, well, I wrote it as fiction, but every one of those stories in that book is based on my actual experiences. So that really blew up my head. So now I'm writing the screenplay, and as part of the research for this film, I start watching YouTube videos with near-death experiencers. And every day I open my YouTube feed, and there's these people, and I'm watching these interviews, and I'm weeping, I'm crying, I'm so moved, I'm so touched. It's like, and I don't know what's going on, and I start reaching out to some of these people and like forming relationships with them. So I'm still working on the screenplay, finished the screenplay. I can't get anybody to read it. Even though I worked in Hollywood for 20 years, all my connections are gone, nobody would read it. And it got to the point where I just had to put it aside. I was just really consumed by it. I realized I just needed to let it go for a while. And now I'm like, well, now what am I going to do? And now we're into 2020, the pandemic, 2021, you know, I got a lot of time to think about this stuff. And one day I just wake up and there's an idea in my head. You have to do a documentary about the near-death experience. It wasn't The Voice per se, but the one thing I will say, and you probably have this as well, I feel like I don't hear voices so much other than that one time I explained that I described earlier, but I have a really strong intuitive sense of things, and my intuition kind of tells me what to do next. I don't always listen, and I often second guess that. But when I do listen, good things happen, like this film. So what I started doing was I started reaching out to some of the people that I had just started these relationships with that I had seen on YouTube and asked them if they wanted to be in the film. Now, it was really important for me to, a couple of things. Number one, I had to be in the same room. I wanted to do it like a real film, so there's no webcams and all of that. Logistically, that makes it very difficult, right? But I'm a one-man band over here. I know how to do film production. I know lighting. I know audio. I know all of that stuff. And so people started saying yes. I also knew that I didn't want to sensationalize the death experience because a lot of the interview, and there's no right or wrong in this, but a lot of the YouTube videos I was watching, there was B-roll of accident scenes and ambulances and some of these people died in pretty horrific ways, car accidents and cancer. And I felt like that could almost be a distraction. So, because what I was really interested in is, well, what happened after that? What was your experience? And how can we take what you learned from your experience and apply that to our lives while we still think we're here in these bodies to make the world a better place? So what I did was I came up with this list of questions. And the first 40 people that I interviewed, I asked these same questions. And what happened, and a lot of them said, well, when am I going to tell my story? I said, we're not doing stories, right? And these were people who've written New York Times bestsellers. I wasn't letting them tell their story. But what was amazing is when I started editing it and putting it all together, and here's the thing, every interview was done separately, individually. Nobody knew who else I had interviewed. I was very quiet about that. They certainly had no idea what anybody else's answer was to those questions. And when you watch the film, it's almost like they're finishing each other's sentences. It's incredible the way it all fits together like this big jigsaw puzzle. It's perfect, right? Then about a year and a half later, I realized, there is value in telling the stories. So I went back to some of those people and I found a bunch of new people. So the film is a combination of these 40 questions and then of some first-person accounts of their near-death experiences, right? And I've been working on this for almost over 3 years now. And last summer, I took a preview on the road. I went from Connecticut to Atlanta to Chicago. I drove to every place in between, and I did all these previews of the documentary. People are having spiritual awakenings in the audience. I mean, and for me, it was so gratifying because I've been living with this thing in my head for almost 3 years. And to see it, people are crying and people are, they're just lit up by all of this. It's like, it was an amazing experience. But one of the comments that I got was, this is amazing, but it's a lot to take in. I mean, we covered these 35 topics. It was just too much for people. So the next intuition I got, and this was back in like October of last year, you have to write a companion book for the film because this way people can absorb the material at their own rate. So since November, I've been working on a book based on the film. Same questions, but I can go into a lot more detail now. I weave in the interviews. The first half of the book is these questions. The second half are 20 stories of near-death experiencers like Lelania, like Eben, people like that. And I really feel, but I'm in the same boat that you're in. It's like, I'm financing this whole thing myself. And that was intentional. I didn't go to any of the studios or streaming services with the documentary because having worked in Hollywood for 20 years, I was pretty sure they were going to want to make it into something else. And it was very important for me that this be a very positive, uplifting, empowering message to all this. I didn't want anybody to be, feel guilty or afraid or, whatever. There's no shock value. It's almost 4 hours long. So it's actually going to be a series. There's no B-roll of accident scenes, of hospital, operating rooms. There's none of that. And it's really 4 hours of talking heads. And people they can't get up out of their seat. I mean, people are just glued to this, right? But I have no idea. I've invested all my money in this. I have no idea how I'm going to get my money back. I have no idea who's going to publish the film or the book, right? The next few months will tell. I've recently been submitting to film festivals. I got into some film festivals. And in the fall, I'm really going to make the push to get it out there.
Uplifting, empowering. Tell us more about that.
It's really important to me, you know. I mean, I listen. I don't want people to suffer. You know, I want people to be happy. I mean, I have a whole, you know, part of my 12-step work was codependency, where I wanted to fix everybody and make everybody happy and people pleasing and all of that. Beyond that, though, I think there was a genuine desire to alleviate some suffering in the world, to make the world a better place, to bring joy to people, you know. And there's so much negativity out there. Like I had to leave Hollywood because there's so much the conflict and the violence, and it's the messaging. And I don't have any kids of my own, but I have 8 nieces and nephews, and I want to leave the world a better place for those kids, you know. And so I think one of the biggest things we can do is help people alleviate some of the fear around death, around dying, around losing a loved one, around our own mortality, you know. And this film, I feel like this film does it beautifully. I have people, you know Eben's story, but there's a guy named Tony Sikoria. Tony was an MD, a surgeon, you know, very well known in his field, you know. And in 1994, I think it was, he was in upstate New York. He was barbecuing at an outdoor party for his family, and he gets hit by lightning. And he dies, right? What happened was he goes to the payphone to make a call. The payphone gets hit by lightning, and he's dead. He describes the experience of dying in such an amazing way. He says, I felt the lightning, and I saw the flash, and I felt my body get thrown backwards. He said, but then all of a sudden I felt like I was moving forward. And he said, it was very confusing. I didn't understand what was happening. And then he said, I heard my mother-in-law screaming and yelling, and she came running down the stairs. And I thought to myself, oh, this can't be good. When your mother-in-law is screaming and yelling and running at you, something bad is going to happen, right? But he said, it was so interesting because she ran right by me like I wasn't even there. And he says, so I turned to follow her to see where she was going. And I looked down and I saw my body on the floor. And he said, the thought I had, he says, oh shit, I'm dead. And he says, I didn't even know I had died. He said, it was this seamless experience. He said, I thought there'd be bells and whistles or something to tell you that you had died, you know? And he goes on to describe his experience in such a funny, matter-of-fact way, you know? But the point is, and this is one of the messages from the film, there is no death. We don't die. Actually, that's not true. The body dies, but we are not our bodies. We're something more than that. And so, and there's a lot of these stories. I'm sure you've heard some of them. A lot of these stories. So this begins, I mean, I can laugh about it now almost, you know, whereas in the past, like a lot of people, I was terrified of what happens after we die. You know, what happened to my dad, you know? The other thing that happened, and this is coincidence, I guess you could call it, I believe it's part of my soul plan. I believe we all have plans. We come into this lifetime with a plan. We still have free will. And we covered this in the film, you know, the difference between free will and the plan. But something that happened about halfway through the production was my younger brother died. Completely unexpected, completely devastating, you know, unbelievable experience. And I won't go into all the details. I've talked about it in other podcasts, and it's in the second book I'm writing. But the gist of it was, I realized that his passing forced me, see, I'm not an experiencer. I haven't had a near-death experience. His passing forced me to decide how much I really believe all this stuff, because there was still a little part of me that doubted some of this, you know, like, could this really be true? I mean, how come I don't experience this, and how come I feel, you know? So there was still a little bit of doubt. And when he passed, first of all, the first thing I'll say is, no matter what you think you know about the afterlife,
you don't,
and death and all of that, you know, I was so bereaved. I never imagined I could feel so sad. You know, the grief was just overwhelming. And I'll say this, you know, I allowed myself to have my feelings, you know, and I would say this to anybody, no matter what you think you know, because I'm thinking, well, what am I crying about? Life is eternal. He's just a breath away. But it was really important for me to have my feelings and to process that grief. And I'll say this too. I'll say, you know, we're not here to be spiritual. We're already that. We came for the human experience. And a big part of the human experience is feeling those feelings of loss and grief and sadness, as well as the joy and the love and everything else. So his passing forced me, And now I can look anybody in the eye and say, it's not even I believe, I know 110%. I know that there is an afterlife, that there is no death. The body dies, but we're not our body. Reincarnation is real. You know, a lot of the stuff that was kind of, you know, hearing, but thinking, you know, kind of woo-woo, you know, spirit guides and angels, totally on board with all of this now. And it wouldn't have, and I know if he hadn't died, I would still be kind of waffling on all of this. And for me to go out and present, because every time I show the film, I do a 1-hour Q&A afterwards. And people have questions, and people are, you know, they lost a loved one or whatever, and they're looking to me for answers, right? Now, I do tell them, I say, look, when it comes to the afterlife, you know, none of us is really going to know until we get there ourselves. And what I do is I stop the film 3 times. I stop the film. We do a guided meditation. And the gist of the meditation is, well, you've heard what everybody else has to say about this. Now, what's your truth? And I give people a chance to go within. And I say, it's our own inner wisdom and our own highest truth about all of this that matters. It's not what Eben Alexandria has to say. It's not what Peter Alessandria has to say. It's not what Bernard has to say. What's your truth? That's what's most important. So this experience of him passing, and I'll say this now, I know this was part of our soul plan together. The timing, I mean, you couldn't, you know, the way it played out. And so that was, for me, the last step in all this. And now I'm ready to share it with the world.
And you are. We have about 5 or 7 minutes left, and you were talking about what it meant to be embodied, what why are we here? I mean, you asked that question. We're eternal, so, you know, we're a spiritual being having a body, physical experience has been a common thing people say. It's not enough for me. And what I got from you is that it's to feel the emotions that are connected with the body. But I got to think you're thinking more than you got to feel stuff. But maybe, I mean, so what else is there for being embodied the way we are?
So I'm going to quote Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God book series. And this has been actually, so I heard a voice a second time. I don't have time to get into that, but that voice confirmed what I'm about to say. And that is, the soul incarnates to know itself in its own experience.
I don't understand. That is
what does that mean?
That is.
So what that means, be open-minded, let it in.
I'm say it over again, because it's just like, what? Okay, go say it over again.
The soul comes into the physical, the 3D, if you will, incarnates to be able to know itself in its own experience. What does that mean? So in heaven, in the afterlife, there is no, what a lot of people call duality, polarities. You know, in this realm, we have hot and cold. We have good and evil. We have, you know, all the polarities, all the dualities that you can think of. In heaven, it's all just light and love. We're not able to experience ourselves, to know ourselves as light and love, unless there's something to contrast that with. In order to know ourselves as light, Bernard, there has to be darkness. In order to know ourselves as good, there has to be evil. And what happens is we create this construct. Some people say this is a simulation, you know, this physical experience, this reality that we think we're experiencing. I'm not going to go there, but I will say that this is kind of a playground for the soul to come and know itself, because it's one thing, here's the example I give. In heaven, it's kind of like reading the book on how to ride the bicycle. All right? On Earth,
it's riding a bicycle. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not only do you ride the bike, but then you fall off the bike. And not only do you fall off the bike, but you scrape your knees. And not only do you scrape your knees, but all your friends are laughing at you. That's the moment that the soul is here for, because in that moment, the soul gets to decide who it is. Okay. And my friends are laughing at me. Does that mean I'm not good enough? Does that mean I'm a jerk? Does that mean I'm unlovable? Right? Or maybe I say, well, there's nothing wrong with me, but they're jerks. They're unlovable. And I go and I beat them up. Or maybe I say, well, wait a second. They're just, they're just kids and I'm just a kid. And, I can forgive them. I might choose forgiveness in that moment as opposed to self-hatred or hatred of another. We have all these choice points in that moment. You don't get that in heaven. There is no darkness. There is no pain. There is no falling off the bike. So we come here for that experience. Now, it sounds crazy, but here's the other thing you got to think about. Two things. Eternity is a really long time. All right. So if we really are eternal beings, we kind of live forever. And eventually, all that light and love, again, this is the way Neil Donald Walsh describes it. We stop experiencing that because there is no contrast. We can't know cold unless there's hot. So it becomes this experience of, I've heard it described as, the soul kind of gets bored.
Yeah.
Because there's no challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same. Why do people climb Mount Everest?
Yeah,
Why do you go on vacation?
That kind of
You go on
love and
vacation
light.
because you want a different experience.
When people talk about the heaven on earth, some of them get to realize that it's boring because it's like light and love and everything's fine. And this is a polarized place, and you got to know stuff by what it isn't as well as what it is. But what's confusing to me, Peter, is the soul somehow up there with light and love knows that that's not really who it is, that it wants to get to know itself by getting into this 3D polarity. So it knows that it's not what it seems to be, but knows that it's got to find out, so that actually, by your description, the souls running around in heaven are all very different. They just don't know how they're different.
Well, I would say this. We do know who we are in heaven. We just can't experience it. That's the difference. You know you're light and love. You know that you're eternal. You know all that good stuff, but there's no way to experience that. We sit around and talk about it, and we share with other souls about their experiences, but you don't, until you actually come into physicality, into the 3D. And here's the other part of the equation. There's this thing called the veil of forgetting. So we come in, our memory is wiped. Now, there's a reason for that. That's not some random thing. That's what makes the experience real.
Yeah.
That's what makes the choices genuine.
Yeah.
If you came in knowing everything there that the soul knows, then there wouldn't really be any point to any of this. It's like knowing all the answers on the final exam ahead of time. At first it might be fun, second time it might be interesting, but eventually it makes the experience meaningless. There becomes no point in taking the exam if you already know all the answers. So the memory is wiped. We come into a body. Now in heaven, we don't really have a body. We're energy. We're this light, basically. And now we take on a body. The body has all kinds, as many of us know, the body has all kinds of problems and challenges and all of that. Then we have other people who've also forgotten who they are, right? And the other thing that happens here is there's the fear, the greatest polarity is love and fear, the love-fear polarity. And Course in Miracles says we're always choosing. Every moment is a decision, and the decision is always the same. Am I choosing love or am I choosing fear? And fear manifests as anger, as hatred, as judgment, as condemnation, as greed, as lust, whatever you want to call it. And so we don't have the opportunity to make that choice in heaven. That's why we come in. Neil Donald Walsh, again, in 1995, and in Conversations with God, he asked God, why are we doing this? And basically God said, because there's nothing else to do. This is it. You live forever. And eventually, Betty Guadagno is in the film. You may want to talk to her for your podcast. Betty said when she was on the other side, she realized, unconditional love is great, but eventually it gets boring. It's like, if that's all there is.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. That's not a danger here, though, because you got to understand, even if we move to the 5D, which a lot of people are talking about, where we will become this civilization of light and love, you got to look at the bigger picture. So right now, there are other, and I don't know where you're at with the whole, extraterrestrial and UFO and all of that, it's coming. There are other civilizations just like ours who are still in that 3D fight or flight, love, fear polarity. So even though the Palladians, they've sorted out their civilization, it's all love and light, they come here to see the polarity, to see the conflict, and they realize, oh, I'm so glad we're not doing that anymore. And they come to help. We'll be doing that eventually. So don't worry about the contrast. There'll always be, we will always find a way to experience that contrast.
That contrast is essential. And that's what this playground Earth is about, those polarities you're talking about. Well, it's time for us to wrap this baby up. And I'm so pleased to be able to understand what you're doing and that Lelania put us together. It's really a great thing. And I think you don't need my wishes, but I'll say them anyway. I wish you a lot of getting this out there to lots of people, because your heart is wide open and you want to bring peace and love to this planet, which it needs plenty of right now. So thank you for being with me today, Peter.
Thank you for having me. Excuse me. Sorry. Thank you for having me.
Having you for dinner, I guess.
And I see you as the same, Bernard. Somebody who's wanting to bring light and love and happiness and joy to people through your work.
While
you wouldn't be having these conversations if that wasn't your purpose.
While recognizing that polarity is part of the game here. That is just fundamental. And I just want to make the game a little more fun. That's what I want to do.
I'm with you, brother.
All right.